Welcome to the Invero Show. Join the Invero team and our esteemed clients and partners as we demystify the complexities of Microsoft cloud systems. We hope to help you accelerate your cloud journey and maximize the value of your investment with Microsoft. And now, on with the show.
All right, let's kick it off. All right, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining, investing your time. Welcome to the 4th edition of the Invero Show. We're grateful for your attendance today and excited to jump into what's going to be a fantastic show and a really interesting topic around the connection of AI overall, but the responsible AI, and then that ties into the role of data governance. I'm pleased to introduce our two speakers here. We've got Nima Mahamoud from Microsoft. Nima is a data and AI cloud solution architect and also a responsible AI expert. The Invero folks have had the pleasure of working with Nima for several years now on all sorts of different things, and grateful for your time and your contribution here, Nima. And then we've got Lance Drozda. Lance is part of the Invero team, and Lance leads our data and analytics practice. In terms of, so I'm just going to kick it off, and for those that I haven't met before, I'm Shawn Ambrose, part of the leadership team here at Invero, and today I am your Invero Show host. In terms of our agenda, what we're going to unpack today, we're going to talk, I'll just tee this up briefly a little bit of why is this worth learning about. You know, we're grateful for your time. You've invested some time here today. Why are we doing this? Just quickly, for those that perhaps are a little bit less familiar with Invero overall, just quickly, how does this fit into Invero's go-to-market and our capabilities? Then I'm going to pass it over to Nima, who's going to share some slides and just go through a brief presentation around responsible AI through the lens of Microsoft. What does that look like? Nima's then going to pass that baton over to Lance to take that conversation from responsible AI and the tie-in to data governance. Those will be a couple of brief presentations independently, but very much connected in terms of the theme and the thought. And then we'll drop the presentation and we'll have a little panel discussion that I'll facilitate or moderate between the two of them. And then we'll just wrap up with how can Invero help? And through that panel discussion, for our audience that's joined, we absolutely welcome, make it interactive. If you've got questions, you can drop them in the chat. You can just pop on and ask them. It's all great. Either way is just fine. So I'm going to keep this rolling here in terms of why is this worth learning about? You know, when I thought about this, it really one word came to mind: trust. Trust has to be there when we're thinking about AI. In the absence of trust, the data quality would be questioned. Brand would be questioned, reputation would be questioned, integrity would be questioned, and all of that would really limit our ability to adopt all the potentials and the capabilities around AI. So in terms of my view, when I think about why is this worth learning about, it's that AI has all this tremendous potential of business value, but there must be an underpinning of trust in order for it to be useful in your business. In terms of how this fits into Invero's go-to-market, I will not drain this entire slide, but I do just want to take your eyes to the bottom of the slide here of Invero's, our purpose. Our whole mission of why do we exist is to help all of you, our clients, maximize the value of your investment in Microsoft. Microsoft tends to be a significant investment, a significant line item on your technology budget. And our mission, our objective is to help you get the best value out of that. How we do that is we're totally focused on Microsoft. It's all we do. And not only do we have strength in our consulting capability around Azure Core, around the data analytics platform, around modern work, around security, but we built a really strong licensing practice as well, because we recognize that for every architectural decision, there's a license consideration that goes along with that. In terms of how this conversation fits in, right there in our data analytics practice is a subcomponent of that around AI. This is a big area for us, whether that's Azure OpenAI initiatives, whether it's helping clients become ready and deploy a Copilot, do that security, things like that. But then right below that is data strategy and governance. This is an area that Lance spends a lot of time on, helping clients of various sizes around thinking about how they manage all those data assets, how they get them into the right classifications, and then ultimately today we're going to talk about how does all that tie back into AI. So that's just a really quick overview of why we're here, how this fits in Invero's go-to-market. And now, Nima, I'm going to pass this over to you to go through your presentation around responsible AI.
Thank you, Shawn, and thank you, the team of Invero. It's a pleasure to meet you and to actually spend more time with all of you about that principle of data governance for the age of AI, because as we think about the business and how AI is going to impact and is impacting all business today, is really touching every one of us, from the individual to companies to like civil peoples. And we think about AI, it's really all those set of services. It's not only ChatGPT and OpenAI services through the natural language chatbot, but it's also in terms of how it's going to have an impact on the search capability, or how you're going to use that in real-time transaction to do either translation or transcription that you can already use through Teams, but that is very useful for every one of us, either even into an accessibility platform when you're making your content available for a more broader audience. So AI as a service is available to a very large set of use cases, and we have to be intentional about how to embrace that AI moment. Because that AI moment is really about making sure that we are positioning that technology in a responsible way. We want to make sure that the way it's being used and the way we are broadcasting that technology to the bigger audience as possible, we are doing that in a responsible and an ethical way. So we have to make sure that from a compliance perspective, we are aligned to any national security principles, that we are advancing those principles also and helping to define those principles globally. Because ultimately, AI is a tool and should be serving the society broadly, not narrowly. We don't want to have the digital conversation happening with a set of people. We want to have that conversation with a broader team of conversation. And that is where responsible AI came into play at Microsoft. So it's not a conversation we're starting recently. Since 2019, we're actually starting to be very intentional about defining those responsible AI principles. So when we think about those responsible AI principles, we are really thinking about 6 pillars. Those pillars are really embodying the principle that we want to infuse and have conversation about. In terms, for example, of fairness, we want to make sure that the systems that are being implemented using AI are treating everyone fairly, and they are avoiding any affecting anyone in a particular way or in a particular population. So really it's about that notion of fairness, but also inclusiveness. This is one of the pillars. The second one is the reliability and the safety. Those AI systems has to be operating in a reliable and safely and consistent manner. It's something that is intentional in terms of technology as a whole. AI has to be consistent in that same sense. That notion of reliability is critical in terms of making sure that the original design of those solutions is the intentional usage of those solutions. So managing that notion of transparency and making sure that people know exactly what they are using the tool for. So being transparent and ensuring that transparency is making sure that everyone understands it, explain it, and make sure that everyone is using the right way. And privacy and security, and this is where a lot of the conversation in terms of data governance also reside to, because data governance is allowing to take care of and implement tooling on privacy and security, on how AI become more relevant. We want to protect the privacy, securing people's and securing business information through those technology. So this is what we want to talk about today. And finally, the accountability. Those systems are designed and are being deployed, but they have to be accountability behind them, ensuring that the system operates as they should be. And this is all that is covering from a responsible AI pillars. Knowing those pillars, they didn't come out of the blue, out of a conversation from people. It was a very iterative process and a journey that we are still in it today. The first version of the responsible AI pillar came in 2019, and we were able to publish a version 2 of that framework in 2021. And as we are evolving and seeing the evolution of the technology, but also the societal expectation of that technology, we are readjusting to that responsible AI principle, so that we are acknowledging that the practice is changing, and we want to be ensuring that this is done in the right way possible. So, because those are principles, and how can we make those principles real is through defining specific goals and requirements. This is a conversation that is really like risk averse, like you want to achieve and you want to implement mitigations and components to manage the risk that you will have to face. So each AI system have their own mitigation layers. But as Microsoft, we're proposing also a set of tools and practice that are coming from as much from the search capability, but also the conversation that we're having with the external companies to define and help you define those requirements and help you define what is the best tool to supplement on that. So as you think about AI, we don't want to hold any of the innovation, but we want you to be intentional on doing it the responsible way. The first one is safeguard your organization employees and your data within the cloud. So making sure that you're following the same best practice in terms of security and governance of data. And this is where we're going to hold the remaining of the conversation of today. Second point, it's build on security and privacy. You want to make sure about that. And finally, growing and working with our partners because they are committed to putting responsible AI into action, either by their existing go-to-market strategy, but by enhancing those go-to-market strategy as they see also the opportunity to help you achieve those goals. So data governance is not on the side of AI, it's part of the AI conversation. As soon as you start talking about AI, you start talking about data and you start talking about where is those data reside. So the data governance part of that is really critical. Your AI is only as good as your data. Garbage in, garbage out. The better you have, the better quality you have on your data, the better quality of outcome and value you would get from that. So ensuring that your AI system are very anchored into the data that you have and that those data are governed the right way possible. So again, it's making sure that your peoples and your data are using to achieve the AI that you need upfront. So data governance, it's a pillar of the conversation. You want to have responsible AI and those AI applications grounded toward your metadata, your policies, your security best practices. And on that, I'm going to let Lance pursue on that conversation, as I know Invero have been very intentional about how to define the data governance story about the age of AI.
Excellent. Thank you, Nima. Appreciate that part. Now we're going to pass over to Lance to do his part, and then we'll bring it all together for some open dialogue here. Over to you, Lance.
Thanks, Shawn, and thanks, Nima. So, and good afternoon or good morning, everyone. My name's Lance Drozda. I'm the practice lead for data and analytics within Invero. Before I kind of jump into kind of my prepared content, I just wanted to give a little bit of perspective of kind of where I come at things from a governance or data governance perspective. So, I've kind of been around the analytics environment and data environment for probably about the last 15 years. And you'll see sometimes I'll talk about data governance, but governance is becoming a little bit more expansive if we look just beyond just data governance itself, right? We can talk about governance around how we manage documents in SharePoint. We can talk about governance on how we manage data assets. Now we're starting to talk about how do we manage governance around using AI or even machine language learning. So I want to kind of just expand that where really in some instances this could almost be called kind of information governance. But if we think about governance just from a program perspective, there's really kind of major kind of three things that I think that are really kind of important as we think about that. First of all, if we think about data governance, it's really about orchestrating the people, processes, and technology. So there's really not any kind of one component. All those three components need to be kind of considered in unison. So people, process, technology, and governance and governance as a program is really kind of an organizational initiative. So think of it as we always kind of know that data and analytics is really at the end of the day maybe facilitated or enabled by IT, but really it's a business, should be a set of business initiatives. And data governance and that as a program is really no different. It really should be a business activity, business initiative. The other second underpinning principle that I think is really as a requirement for effective data governance, and even more so as we talk about kind of AI, is to be able to prioritize the data quality and understand the accuracy so that whenever we're using it for either decision making or we're actually having kind of exposing kind of our AI apps outside the organization, that we actually understand what the data quality is and what it's not and its accuracy. And I've worked with organizations where you don't necessarily need to have 100% of data quality. And sometimes that's always kind of a shifting kind of goalpost as, you get to 99 and the last 100th is difficult. But understanding really where your data quality is, what those data assets are. So having an understanding of the data accuracy is probably almost, if not equally as important than having 100% of data quality. And then being able to prioritize the privacy and transparency of that data as we're using AI applications. And that really puts pressure on being able to classify our information and then be able to put controls and constraints around those digital assets. So when somebody's actually using a natural language kind of interface, such as a chatbot or ChatGPT or something of that effect, is that we understand that the question that they ask is going to get a certain set of response back, and we actually understand what we're actually kind of illuminating and what we actually don't want to illuminate. So kind of key principles. So as we talk about, for the rest of today, I want you to think about when we're thinking about governance or data governance, think about the following three things. And I think they're really important. First of all, there's transparency. It's understanding your data and understanding of what it is and what it's not and its life cycle, all the way from source all the way to consumption. Standardization, so aligning that you're understanding definitions and ensuring inside the organization that you have a common talking language about what data quality is, what data quality isn't, what the meaning of the data attributes are, and what they are not. And then, of course, when we talk about from a data governance program perspective, we need to have accountability. So we need to understand kind of who's who in the zoo, who's responsible for data quality, what's the mechanisms for actually coming to consensus when there's disagreeing or differing opinions of what a data asset the meaning should be and how it should be consumed and used. Some other points here is that when we think about data governance, don't think of it as a project, think of it as a program. So it's more of the journey as opposed to the destination. Data governance, and as with any kind of business program, it's a team sport. It needs resources both from the business and those that actually are the domain experts, as well as those that are support, the enablers in IT. And that data governance spans processes across kind of all data. Right. And so when I say all data, I would expand that to all information assets. So that can be either documents, that can be either structured data, that can be other types of data of information assets that you may have. And most clients is that, you want to think big, have a kind of a wider vision and structure for your data governance program, but start small. Start from areas of strength and understand where your maybe areas of weakness or areas of improvement within the organization, and kind of use those in conjunction with each other. The other last point is that you always want to continually measure and kind of monitor the program, right? And there's ways to do that. So similar as that we would kind of measure and monitor kind of data quality, and there's metrics and ways to manage the data governance program in and of itself. And that really kind of helps establishing a business case for the sustainment of a data governance program. And it also kind of helps quantify the value of it as well. So usually the other thing I tell clients is that having a framework helps. And each client customer or organization should probably kind of start with likely a common framework, and they'll likely tailor it to themselves. Like any methodology, you take the best that works and discard the others that may not be as best fit for you. But here's an example of just a high-level data governance framework that really kind of handles both. You'll see some things that both kind of have a strong business connotation and then a large kind of technical or data connotation. So whether it's around policies and standards or whether managing data quality, handling privacy and security, figuring out what the meaning is of the data and how it should be applied and making it a node throughout the organization. And then as well as what I call kind of an operating model, but the area of whether it's a center of excellence or if it is a working group or whether it is a data governance steering committee, but that entity that actually helps kind of orchestrate what are the operating procedures, what's the escalation procedures, what's the definition procedures, how do we understand that we have transparency in what we're actually illuminating from our data assets. How do we ensure that there's a process to check within bias? So actually we're applying kind of, prompts and different kind of business rules as we're using AI. How do we ensure that we understand if there's any bias kind of inherently that's actually bubbling through to the information that we're actually putting out? And if we can look at those areas or those high-level buckets through a perspective of technology, people, and process, it kind of helps set a kind of a true North Star of where you can kind of send the aspiration will be pointing a governance program towards. The next slide is really I just kind of exploded this out as a customer example that we had of just some of the different areas or sub areas underneath each of these areas. And AI kind of fits in a lot of these places. You'll see that around kind of data quality, around data stewardship, around being able to classify those data assets. And there's probably some things too, if we actually tailor this a little bit more to AI, that would actually, that we'd want to understand, for example, let's say model drift. So how do we actually monitor our AI applications to ensure that we understand that if there's any kind of drift in the model, that we actually are measuring that and have a means and a process to actually start to correct those. But I'm showing this to say that there's kind of lots of pieces underneath these, and that's why it's kind of data governance is really kind of more of a journey than a destination. And that we don't need to spend all of our time, going through each of these exhaustively, but consciously, most organizations have to at least go through each of these sub bullets to understand is how much do they impact them, or whether they don't, and to what degree. And so having a holistic understanding before you start your data governance journey and using a framework of this nature tends to kind of help to ensure that you got a kind of a holistic perspective. Then you can kind of start to narrow that in and what the first steps to approach. And as I mentioned before, this is kind of the think big picture, and then you kind of start small. So the last slide I have is really just talks about just some important considerations as we think about data governance in relation to AI. So if I would think like if all the things around data governance, what are the things that I would draw out more that would come to the higher top of the stack when I think around kind of AI? And so the first is really around data quality and integrity. So really need to have an understanding of our data quality within the assets that we actually want to use to generate our AI models. And we also need to be able to have a understanding of that life cycle. So how is that data being collected? How is it stored? How are we processing it? And how ultimately is it being established for analysis? Data privacy and ethics. So it's really important to understand is how do we start to keep the confidential information or the privacy of our information as such. And with the natural language processing applications, when somebody's asking a question, how do we ensure that the prompts and the models are actually ensuring that we keeping some assets private when we want to, or depending on the user, or depending on the circumstances, how do we actually kind of make that a little bit more free to access? So it's important to have those as a part of that data governance program. So model governance and accountability, and that gets a little bit back to what I mentioned, is having to understand what the model is, what any biases are within that model, understanding model drift. And so all of these things really need to be understood and kind of managed through the development and deployment, and then managed and monitored and maintained. And so a data governance program, when we talk about AI, there's a lot, it starts to become a little bit more responsibility within a governance program to understand what those models are, how they're being kind of exposed, and how they're actually being consumed. And I think a lot of folks can understand that security and access controls are kind of an important tenet out of all of this. So how do we protect some of our most sensitive information? And how do we actually understand that, what should we expose, what should provide access, and which should we not? And I think a common theme that's starting to come out more and more as we see that more and more AI applications start to come out. And again, whether that is using Copilot, whether that would be in using, I'd even say even if it's more of a predictive analytics type of application, is that the models and the rules that we're using underneath that are actually processing that data, we need to ensure that we understand if there's what data bias or any data bias and the fairness of that data. So when we're actually trying to put out accurate answers, we need to ensure that it's just not syntactically accurate, but contextually that we want it to be accurate. And we need a way to be able to monitor and kind of control and measure, that mechanism as well, which I think is a little bit of a nuanced and kind of an area of still kind of understanding on how to do that as in a larger governance kind of program. So that's the prepared material I had. Now, Shawn, I'll turn it back to you. And I know that we'll probably, I'd like to kind of explore just even between the three of us some of these topics a little bit more, and how we stitch and bring together, from the data governance side and the AI side, and kind of understand where the cross section is and and how one enables the other.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Lance, and thank you, Nima, for the great presentations and such an interesting topic and the tie-in between the two pieces. Yeah, as I listen to the two of you, it seems to me it's a bit of an old problem with a new twist. The requirement for data governance, Lance, for as long as you and I have known each other, a couple of years now, we've been talking about data governance, and that's been going on for years and years in your career and just in the marketplace. I think AI drives a higher need, a higher requirement for that quality and accuracy. Nima, I loved what you said there, that your AI is only as good as your quality of your data. So it's great to think about leveraging all these AI tools and possibilities. But if the underbelly of your data is flawed, it's not accurate, that inefficiency, that lack of accuracy is just going to flow all the way through. Lance, why don't I start with a question for you, which just and Nima, please jump in too. I don't want to target it just to Lance, but just can you just talk a little bit about like what are the key components of a robust data governance framework that ensures AI systems are transparent and accountable?
Well, I think kind of back to, I'll kind of reemphasize kind of the data quality management, I think is really, really important. And not just because whether it's syntactically correct, but the act of actually understanding the quality of your data, then you start to synthesize, what is our data actually telling us? What do we want to expose? What don't we want to expose? So the act of actually going through and understanding and measuring and exploring your data quality allows you to kind of get to some other areas that I think are really important around governance and around data assets for AI. And I think it also kind of helps with the kind of the ethical use of the data. So in other words, what do you want to be using it for? What is its purpose? Right? And how do we then start to protect that? So when you start with kind of understanding what the data quality is, then you actually are starting to inventory and understand the meaning and start to document and come to consensus of what that data is. That really does help then understand, well, what are the policies and rules we want to put around data privacy or the ethical use of that data? The other thing that I think is really important is that there's, from a governance perspective, there has to be kind of internal mechanisms for accountability and governance, right? A lot of these things that we talk about are only going to be as valuable as when the business and the IT or the digital side of the organization can kind of come together and work together, because each side is kind of, one side, each of them are kind of a different side of the same coin. Right. And so we can talk about, data quality management, ethical use of data, being able to have transparency in your AI models. But unless you have both business and digital or IT together and working underneath a kind of an organizational framework on how to manage and how to actually utilize those and understand how they should be put forward, that's one of the biggest things that I think. So we can say, here's the 10 things you need to do for AI and data governance. But if there's not an organizational kind of operating model or mechanism for that to come together, it's really hard to actually do it successfully.
So
Nima, I'm curious to you, from your perspective, and what are you seeing in the marketplace? Do you see anything that's a little bit additive or a little bit, intersects some of those things?
A lot of the intersects, so definitely, and the data stewardship that you were just mentioning about that conversation with digital and business working together, because ultimately everyone in a company now use data to make decisions, to build a business process out of that. So that notion of oversight in terms of data stewardship have been very critical when we talk about AI. Those AI conversations start most of the time from the business side, and then they quickly move to digital and the IT folks. And that's very okay, because we want to have everyone around the table to actually host that conversation. And we actually have them think about what do they have today and what they should be improving. So data governance has been critical to also the auditing and the reporting of those systems. So now you're adding an additional system that is going to be using your data and creating new set of data. So how will you audit on that? How would you report on that? So thinking about the performance in terms of AI, and AI model or drifting, as you were mentioning, there is the data drift. Now we are seeing model drifting toward the behavior. So we have to have some ways of monitoring that as part of responsible AI and best practice.
Yeah, thanks so much for that, Nima and Lance. Maybe just to take it a little further then, and you've both touched on this a little bit, maybe expand a bit more about thinking about the challenges of managing that data quality, especially in the context of AI and data governance. Lance, any thoughts on that around the challenges of managing data quality?
Yeah, so there's definitely tools that help kind of, be able to kind of help analyze and profile data, from a data quality perspective. But there's another thing that actually comes into this as well too, is that, the data complexity and volume, right? So, as we put out, it's kind of an analytics kind of, it's kind of an interesting thing. The more that we put data out, it doesn't really, quench the thirst for information. It actually, puts more pressure on it. So the more data you put out, the more people need. And with some of these AI applications, it's really the need for additional volume of data to continue to actually sharpen the models or actually put out more accurate kind of responses for natural language processing kind of chatbot types of interfaces. That's going to be another key challenge. And so it puts into, so when we talk about more data to actually help facilitate the models, also push more pressure on the data quality. I was listening to a podcast yesterday. It was around GPT and some of the, and also Google and some of the other vendors that are actually having these, kind of open AI or natural language processing types of applications, and that they believe by kind of 2026 that they would have been able to have indexed all the English content on the internet. So that includes actually audio, text to, from speech to text from all videos on the internet. That includes sound files, that includes written text. But there still will be this quest for how do we get more information and start answering questions. And some of the slippery slope with AI is that we'll say, well, we'll have some of the AI engines now actually create the output and use that to feed the new models, which there's this idea of synthetic data. So my point is not like my opinion on what that means kind of going forward, but that there will be this pressure to use kind of more and more volumes of data to help support these models as they become more useful and beneficial to the end users. And so that's the other thing I think that we'll probably see some challenges on how do we get more data to be participating in this ecosystem.
Yeah, thanks, Lance. Nima, anything to add on that? Do you want to riff on that at all?
Yes, I will maybe add another additional. So the volume, the variety of the data is going to be like broader and broader, and also the bias that come with those data. So, and data governance, it's a tremendous tool to actually help us being better at the bias that we have in our data. So I believe if we were focusing on something in terms of challenge and focus on how AI and data governance can win together, it's really that notion of bias, but also the compliance with the regulation. AI system must have to comply to various data protection and privacy regulation. So we have to think about how can that framework of data governance can ensure those AI systems are designed and operate how they are supposed to based on regulation that come very quickly. So again, using those models maybe to learn from those regulations and see how we could focus or where the priority should be driven from in a generative way also. So it's interesting to see AI has the target, but also as a tool of the toolbox of the data governance space now to actually drive business rule from the regulation being published to us.
One of the things that we think about too, when we talk about bias, I think sometimes that really always has a negative connotation. And I want to change that maybe just to kind of maybe put this out there is that when we talk about putting out information assets, we can actually, illuminate our information in the best interest of those that are consuming it, and as well as the individual, the organization that's actually putting it out. And so, for example, I would expect that if I'm going to go to a certain e-commerce site and go through a chat bot and ask for product recommendations, I'm probably going to get a tilted view of the products they would suggest based off of what that organization has to sell, right? So there is a little bit of bias there. So my point is that we need to understand what the bias is, but there can be. So for, let's say, an internal natural language processing chatbot type of application, maybe there's things that we want people to be seeing more than other things. Right. And there's not, and we can kind of use that in essence, that set of either preferences or kind of content direction, or sometimes even called bias, to actually do that. So I want to make sure that when we think about bias, it's just something that it's something that we have to eliminate. I think it's just something that you need to understand, and then be understanding of what you consciously, in the transparency of how you're using your data assets and what you're using them for. And so some of these things, I just want to make sure that we don't kind of think about them in a way that are so negative that, we make sure, let's not have any bias. Well, depending on what your definition of bias is, should there be some tilting of data to be used in the proper way for your best interests as well as those of the consumers? Yeah, probably. And so, and that just really dovetails into then what the transparency is around that.
Yeah, well,
yeah,
I think that's such a good contrast there, right? Of bias, should you be promoting a bias in your tool set, and then what about the integrity of what you're putting forward? But sorry, Nima, I overstepped you there. Please jump in.
No worries. I was thinking that in terms of bias, it's being able to acknowledge them. Until you see them, you don't know them. And that's where, like, when we talk about bias, it's knowing they exist. There is no good and bad. It's not a binary conversation here. It's like, you know, this is happening. What do you do with that? So now knowing that notion of governance and how you want to govern that behavior of the model toward an intention. So transparency come back again, but it's really that. And there is a use case that came out a long time ago when we used to start having more AI model on shopping website. And I'm going to hold on the name of the shopping company. And they used to learn from the type of question that was coming from or the search that the user used to do. And based on that, they were sending out through the marketing engine a set of sales and promotion based on what they should be thinking about. What had happened is that that company actually used that and learned from the behavior of their customer to the point that they were able even to identify that those customers are going to have a baby shortly. But it became as they receive an email from the marketing engine who suggests them like Pampers and all of those things, but they didn't know they were expecting a baby. So it was sent to the wrong person. So it did happen to actually open a conversation in terms of AI. How much does the system, because the system may have a lot of data points based on the behavior, should the system be sharing more? So being aware of that, those patterns, aware of those bias, and learning from them and deciding what to do with that, because not everything should be done from that.
And sometimes with our models, we expect them to be producing a certain thing, but without having a really kind of good understanding of what our data is, the data that we're collecting, what we're actually trying to do with that data, all around transparency, and why I think a governance model is so important, is that we can actually be teasing out things that we didn't realize that we knew with our data. And you really want to be conscious of that, because it can be back to your example, Nima, or we can actually put out something that somebody can actually infer that we don't want them to infer based off of either data privacy, confidentiality. There's a number of different myriads of things about that. So I think that when we talk about a governance model, it's really to help manage and promote that transparency and understanding and conscious think through of what we're actually doing with our data, so we don't get into these situations where, geez, we're able to derive from a bunch of questions something that we didn't expect that we're actually serving back out into the world without actually having an understanding of that.
Exactly.
So what about navigating then the complexities of the data ownership and the stewardship? Can you maybe tie that in a little bit here to what Lance and Nima, what you're both speaking about?
Yeah, I think that kind of goes together, because to understand, what your data assets are, I think is really kind of, what the common meanings are, what it should be used for, what it shouldn't be used for. And then with an organization is kind of who owns that meaning, right? Who's the custodian, not of the data, but of the business meaning of that data, the use of the data. And I think that that's going to become more important, because the more that we're using this data in different ways, the more it becomes important to understand, what we're using it for, who's governing it, who owns the meaning, who's the custodian of that. And that does start to kind of come up with also things around fitness for use, right? So what is this data really fit to be using for? And so that's another component on top of, we talk about things around data meaning and data, lexicons and understanding what it is, but also when we start talking about some of these additional kind of applications that can move really quickly is, well, what's the fitness of purpose for this data, right? And what is it appropriate for? And what is it not appropriate for? And there may be some data assets saying, it is not good. We don't want to use that for AI because for certain contexts, and others we may consider that, we really have never thought that maybe some of this data actually could be. And so I really think that governance model that handles accountability and ownership and consensus within the organization across different data domains and expertise, I think are really important. And I think that they become more important as we talk about these types of applications, because in essence, what we're really doing is using our data in a lot more fluid and a lot more expedient way.
Yeah, for sure. And Lance, again, I'll refer back or reflect back on the time you and I have been working together for a couple of years here, and how many clients you've been helping with on data governance programs and journeys. And I would say a lot of that, if we go back a couple of years ago, AI was not really the main event of that. But yet everything you're saying still applies, right? So it's kind of back to that requirement of the foundational need for a great, like a solid, robust data governance rigor. But then when you start to drop generative AI models on top, now it's the need is just radically amplified.
Right. I'll give you kind of an old school example here, and I'll date myself a little bit. But way back in the days, that I was doing some an analytics application, and it had a lot of ability to kind of do drill throughs, right? So you get your summary report, and you'd be able to drill through and get the details further down and down. I was working with a healthcare agency, and they actually had some external reports that provided this feature. But depending on where you drill down to and some of the filters, you can actually start to intersect into the really finite set of data lines that could actually expose some privacy and confidentiality. And so my point is that as a new feature in how we use data, we almost need to take a step back and watch how people are using it, because that will define the things that we actually need to address. And so it's hard to predict how people will use some of these applications. It's really going to be how you're going to monitor and manage and understand as they're evolving, and then kind of responding and correlating in hand. And so that's the other thing too, is that we can't go in just thinking, okay, here's how this will all work. Humans are really diverse and kind of unique beings, right? And so how they use the data, especially in free form chat environments, is probably going to be, we're probably going to get, you'll probably get some surprises, probably some good, maybe some not, about how people want to consume that data, and that governance model that actually has you being able to monitor and understand and be able to manage and move with your user community as they're using these applications, I think is going to be really important as well. Hopefully I answered your question, Shawn.
I think you did, and then some for sure.
Definitely. Yeah. And the way we think about that within Microsoft is that we want to hear about like the society impact of those. So as you like, and the sooner we talk about AI, the sooner the first question or the first two questions that come into everyone's mind, from the C-level to the developer who are going to use that, it's where is the security about? How can you ensure the data is used the right way? And that is a very fair concern, because people see how it's going to impact everyone on their daily basis, and they want to make sure it's done the right way. So if you have questions about that, don't hesitate to put them into the chat. We're going to share also some resources for you to read and continue learning on that. It's a journey. It's not a one-time off. It's a journey, and we are all into that one.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Thank you, Nima and Lance. I'm just going to go back to a screen share here and just wrap up for a moment on how can Invero help here. And there's lots of ways. Ultimately, I'd take you to the bottom of the slide, which is exploratory conversations. As you can see, Nima and Lance both have a tremendous amount of depth and passion on this topic, and just love to open up dialogue and offer our learnings, offer our guidance, but also learn from each of you of what you're doing. It, as Lance said, is rising the tide of the whole initiative. Some things that are a bit more tactical and specific. Nima mentioned some great links and resources. We'll share those out as well. Lance has put together a great guide to data governance. We'll just send that and share it with all of you as well. Hopefully you find some nuggets of value in that. Things that are a bit more specific, we've helped many organizations around data governance assessments, which ultimately leads to a roadmap and a journey. And so those are the kind of things that we can chat about. We can chat about, Nima talked about security. One of the areas of security is thinking about whether it's deploying Copilot or any generative AI model, is managing or understanding the file overshares that have happened within your 365 environment, and how do you get a handle on that? How do you analyze that, and ultimately how do you remediate that so information that should have been privileged doesn't get into the wrong hands in a very innocent or accidental way. Those are the kind of things we're chatting with clients about on a pretty regular basis right now. And then as well, just the art of the possible in Azure OpenAI. What can you do? Number one use case for sure is chatting with your own documents, but the permutations of that and the possibilities are endless. And so whether that's Lance or Craig or any member of our team, we'd love to just have chats with you about these things and see where they go. So ultimately, it's about let's just have some conversations. Though that door is open at any time. We welcome questions, we welcome thoughts, and we'd love to get on a call with you or come and have a cup of coffee with you and chat a bit more about what's going on in your world and how you're tackling not only your AI thinking, but thinking about the data governance and the responsibility foundation that sits beneath that. And so I'll just wrap up with, so as I said, this is our episode 4. We're having a ton of fun with the platform of the Invero Show and the opportunity to have really great and interesting discussions around topics that are of high interest to our clients and the community overall. And we always welcome any ideas you've got. If you got something to say, hey, I sure would love the Invero team and the Invero Show to tackle that topic, bring it on, and we'll think about it. We've already got our next show in the queue here, which is a bit of a tie-in to this one here around this file overshare. So Nima talked about security. This is obviously critical in everything that we do, in particular around rolling out AI tools. I mentioned a little bit about this file overshare piece. We're going to unpack that in more detail in our next show. Craig Slack, many of you know Craig. Craig's our founder and our CTO. This is an area that he's dove into deeply. He's going to be joined by Robert Gates, who's a principal cloud solution architect at Microsoft and an absolute guru in terms of Copilot, generative AI models, and securing that. And we're going to have a client on as well, one of our great clients here in Canada that's going to talk through their lens of navigating file overshare and getting to a safe place so that a place with more clarity so that they could safely deploy Copilot and other generative AI models. So stay tuned for that. I'll make sure that all of you get the invite. It's going to be on Friday, May the 24th at 11 a.m. Pacific. So this concludes this episode of the Invero Show. Thank you all so much for your time. I hope you got some value out of the show.